Welcome back to Free to Pursue. I am Hélène Massicotte, and I'm very pleased to bring you another video. For a change, this video is not a book review. I thought that I would film a two-part series on this channel to explain how I read books. For anybody who is reading book reviews, if you're like me, I always wonder when somebody is doing a book review or making book recommendations, how much have they read? How did they read the book? What other books did they read in that category? And what's their definition of reading? So I thought that I would offer you a two-parter on how I read books, so that you could have more context on how I develop my recommendations, how I consume books in general, and any other kind of behind the scenes information that you would or might appreciate about the book reading and reviewing process. In part one, I will cover how I keep track of my reading and how some of those statistics are valuable to some people who I can offer quick sound bites to. The second part is going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of how I read books and everything around that topic. So if you want to hear about part one, stick around, it's coming right up. So just a little bit of background. I have been reading books for decades. I started off quite young, and the funny thing is I used to sneak a flashlight into my room and read books under the covers, and that is until I was found out. And it was a good news story when I was found out, because when my parents realized that I was reading past my bedtime, they said, and trying to sneak it, they said, well, no, if you're in your bedroom and you are reading, you can keep the light on as long as you like because you're reading. And so my book consumption just went through the roof. I read some of the typical books. Nancy Drew is one line of books that would not be a surprise. I also read a lot of Agatha Christie. And I read a lot of books in French because I didn't speak English until I was 8 or so. So actually I would say 7, but reading in English would have been when I was 8. So I consumed a lot of books throughout my life. There's only a stint during the I'd say 2009 to 2013 really, where I was not reading a whole lot of books. And that was because I was spending my days reading a lot of technical information and a lot of legal documents. So anything in Times Roman numeral, Garamond, or Helvetica, I did not want to read at the end of the day. My eyes were tired, and so my consumption of written materials for my own enjoyment stopped there for a few years. So I very much empathize with folks who, for a number of reasons in their lives, have difficulty putting their eyes to the page and consuming content in book form. When I left corporate Canada as a full-time employee, I have to say that it did not take me very long to rekindle my love affair with books. And I started reading quite a few books. The Millionaire Next Door is one of them. I think that was my gateway drug to reading a ton of other books. And I started reading a bunch of Thomas Stanley's stuff, and then that expanded into other books, and I just really enjoyed it. And to the point where I was reading so much, I thought, I should just start to keep track of this, just out of fascination. And then the question came to mind, I wonder how quickly I'm going to get to, say, 1,000. And that just became a number that I inadvertently shared with someone one day, and it just kind of became a thing that I'm on my way to reading 1,000 books. It was never, I didn't start with that idea, it just sort of evolved that way. If you're curious, I'm past 326 with about 3 books on the go. I'm not difficult when it comes to genres in books. I will read quite a variety of books. For example, some favorites: The Little Prince, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, The Last Lecture, Scarcity, Money Talks, The Year of Less, The War of Art. Anyway, that's a sprinkle of some books. Although I have to say, 90% or so of the books I read are nonfiction. The odd book comes through for sure. Dietland is one that comes to mind as a work of fiction, as is Confessions of a Shopaholic. Just some fun stuff that makes you think, but makes you think in a different way as well, creeps in. About a year and a half ago, 3.5 years into this voracious reading, I decided to document my process because I was starting to get a lot of questions from folks about not only how much do I read, but how do I keep track of things in order to do book summaries or reference books or do book reviews. And so I decided to document my process a little bit. And as I mentioned in this part 1, I'm going to cover right now how I track what I read. You will also see a part 2 video, as I mentioned in my introduction, on the step-by-step process I use to actually do what I call read a book. And there's more to it than that broad statement might indicate. So after a few months of reading back in 2013, I realized that I wanted to keep track of what I was reading. And what I was reading from a pure how many books, what my frequency was, and so on. And so I started keeping some statistics. And I'm actually not that big on that kind of a measurement, but I find that statistics, which, if you're kind of curious about over measuring, Super Sad Love Story, I think that's the name of the book, is a work of fiction that really brings that point home like nothing else. But what I found was that we are reductionist as people, and if we can't fully appreciate what someone's experience is, we try to reduce it to the most simple statistics, really. I mean, statistics are just one impression of an experience or of something going on in the world. But if someone can't fully understand your experience, they'll understand numbers around it that you can offer, any sort of context that can be easily consumed. So I started tracking what I was reading, in what order, each month, and as a total. I also started keeping track of the notes that I was taking and the quotes that I was taking from each book, because as I was writing articles, it became more and more important in my reading to organize my thoughts, notes, and quote recording process so that I could come back to a book later, sometimes months later, to write an article that referenced it without feeling like I was starting from square one. And good notes, good references for my future self, I have found to be absolutely invaluable in saving time and remembering more quickly and more thoroughly what I thought at the time. And this tracking has enabled me to appreciate things in retrospect. When I look at the evolution of my reading, I notice that I will sometimes have one book cause an avalanche of reading. So one book can lead to 2 or 3 more recommendations, and those recommendations lead to 2 or 3 more. And I call that a gold vein, following a gold vein. Sometimes there's more than one at the same time. But something triggers a fascination and I want to know more. Sometimes it's personal finance, sometimes it's economics. It has also been psychology, behavioral psychology specifically. It has also been health and fitness. It has been also the motivators in life, or what makes for a happier, more fulfilling life. So all of these types of topics I have gone narrow and deep on from time to time, and it's so interesting for me to see my evolution from within a topic and then from one topic to another. Now this might sound a little bit crazy if you're not a voracious reader, but the more books we have under our belt, the more some titles can sound the same, and you almost need to see the book cover to know if you've read a given book, because the title may not tell you. And interestingly enough as well, sometimes book covers over the years, they change the art on the book cover to try to rekindle sales. And so sometimes that doesn't even help. But for me, keeping track of the book titles and authors of the over 300 books I've read has helped me to do two things. It has helped me at a glance, because I have one big picture of all the books I have read so far. At a glance, I can scan the book covers and remind myself of what the title was of this book I'm thinking about, or I can quickly scan the titles and know whether or not I have read a book. I can sort by title, or I can sort by author as well, if I want to refresh my memory on what other books or what total books I've read from a given author. And I have to say, having that list or that picture at a glance has made it so much easier for me to make very quick recommendations. Of course, off the top of my head, I can think of a book that is very reasonable, but it might not be the perfect book for that person, because it's not one of my favorites, but it would probably resonate more with them than it did with me. So being able to see the whole list of books that I've read has been helpful so many times. So it is very much worth it to keep it up to date. And I think it's also helpful for free to pursue viewers or readers, because one of the things I have learned is when someone makes a book recommendation, I now ask a couple of questions. One of them is, how much do they read? And the second one is, how many books of that nature in that area of research or topic has this person read? Because to me, it makes a big difference in what I'm going to think of the recommendation. Now, I'm not going to say that a given book isn't a great recommendation just because somebody hasn't read very many, but the more they can compare that book they're recommending to other things they've read, I think they can give you more context on why it's so good, and maybe compare it to something else that you may have read. I think it's a lot more helpful to understand the context, to understand their experience as a book reader. Now, I mentioned statistics earlier, and so I wanted to offer you a few statistics, whether you are an avid reader or not. At the time I wrote the article, How I Read Books, I was at 268 books, and so the rest of the statistics are based on the 268 books, and I'm well over 300 at this point, but we'll go with the math at that time. That was after 3.5 years of reading. So that's about 1.4 books a week, and that means, just in my behavior, that in any given month I will read from 0 to 13 books. And so why would I have 0 to 13 books? Is my abandon rate for books is about 30%. And if I haven't read a book cover to cover, I don't count it. And so very many books that I abandon maybe in the first few chapters, sometimes a third, halfway, even 80% of the way. If I don't finish it cover to cover, I don't count it. The books in that 268 book range were from 50 to 500 pages. And 268 books was 53,000 pages read. And my average amount of notes for a given book is about 1.5 pages per book. And I continue to track my reading and I continue to track my notes, but I did not update the statistics since that article that I am referencing, which you will find on Free to Pursue, and I will definitely leave the link down below. One of the things I think is important to mention, when I say I have read a book and I have read it cover to cover, I don't tend to consider audiobooks as books I've read, even though I consume audiobooks. The most recent that I consumed was Sapiens. And I did not put it in the book count because I find that audiobooks, although they're very entertaining, they're not immersive like reading a book. So for example, when I'm reading a book, it does happen to me, it happens to everyone, that my mind wanders. I will stop myself, go back to wherever it was on that page or the previous page where my mind was engaged and restart my reading from there. It's a very active activity, and I like it. I like its immersiveness because the fact that you have to make an effort as you're reading, I also find helps us integrate the information. You may guess from that I am not a fan of speed reading. Speed reading, I think, is more so for people who don't appreciate or enjoy what they're consuming, and to me, if it's a book I don't like, I don't finish it. So I talk about statistics, and I have shared some with you today. You may or may not have found them useful, but I have to say every time I talk statistics, I cringe a little bit because to me, as I mentioned very early on in this presentation, it really doesn't even scratch the surface on the experience, but at least it's better than nothing. What matters more, though, is the quality of the reading, and Shane Parrish from Farnham Street Blog has a fantastic article on quality reading, and I will leave that link down in the description box as well. As third-party validation for what I'm saying, I'd like to read a quote from The Little Prince from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, because we value statistics as adults, but as kids, we know they're not all that useful. You may recall or know The Little Prince's most famous quote that what is essential is invisible to the eye. This quote really reinforces why, so here it goes. Grown-ups love figures. When you describe a new friend to them, they never ask you about the important things. They never say, what's his voice like? What are his favorite games? Does he collect butterflies? Instead, they demand, how old is he? How many brothers does he have? How much does he weigh? How much does his father earn? In short, reading books should feed the mind, not add to bragging rights. And that's really what I want to convey here, is that I really appreciate how books feed the mind. And I think that you will get a lot out of that process by viewing part 2 to this 2-part series. I hope you found the tracking and statistics somewhat interesting for the How I Read a Book 2-parter, and I look forward to hearing what you think down below in the comments. If you like this topic, please give it a thumbs up, and if you like the contents on Free to Pursue, I would love it if you would consider subscribing. I'll say see you in the next video, in this case in part 2. But for now, take care.